Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the Informs NCSU Student Chapter webinar series. Today, we have a special guest, Katie Homar. Since earning her PhD in English and the certificate in TESOL from the University of PIttsburgh, Katie has taught writing to college-level students for nearly a decade. She is the current Director of Academic and Engineering Writing with NC State's Graduate School Professional Development Team. She enjoys her current research at NC State for opportunities to learn about research across disciplines and help students to communicate their work to a variety of stakeholders. For today's workshop session, she will give strategies for making clear and concise sentences, and you will use those tricks on your own writings. So basically, we'll record the first half of the meeting and we'll have the participation of second part not recorded. So actually, before the presentation to get kicked out, I invite all of us to open our camera and we'll take a group picture. Is everyone ready for the to open up the camera? Is there? Hello, we are now going to take a group picture. So I invite every one of you to open up your camera. Is it okay for everybody? If not, I might just take photo with all of your name. I'll wait for more seconds to wait for people to open up the camera. Let's wait for more people. Okay, I think 6 of us open up our camera, so I think that's great. Okay, Katie, it's all yours.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you and welcome Informs community. I'm Dr. Katie Homar, the Director of Academic and Engineering Writing Support at NC State. Thank you all for having me. It's great to see you. If you are comfortable, you can also open up your camera or leave them on for today's session since it will be a bit interactive. Today's workshop will focus on how to write concise sentences. So let me open up my screen too. I'll be sharing my screen with slides. I also shared a link to a folder with shared materials that we'll be using throughout the workshop. I will also text links in the chat. So for a little bit of background too, I'm part of the Graduate School's Professional Development Team Initiative. There's another Zoom portrait, and we're part of a comprehensive set of writing, teaching, and career preparation programs out of the graduate school. We work with trainees, masters, PhDs, and postdocs across all disciplines, but my position does have a special relationship with the College of Engineering. So it's great to see you today, and thanks too for your interest in this workshop on writing concise sentences. This is an interactive Zoom workshop. The first portion will be more lecture driven as I present tips and tricks for writing concisely. The second half will be more interactive, featuring activities and opportunities to get feedback on a short piece of your own writing. To communicate during the workshop, you can use the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Since we are a small group today too, feel free to unmute yourself, video or audio, to speak at different points during the workshop as well. If you've been to an online workshop with the graduate school before, you know that our programming is highly interactive. So take a minute too, you can access this shared folder drive. I'll drop the link again in the chat. You should log in though with your NC State credentials to access those materials. It is open to the NC State community. So as a reminder too, you can, we'll send out a link to a short survey as well. It's a less than 5-minute anonymous survey to give feedback on this workshop, since your feedback too helps us plan future graduate school workshops and versions of this concise sentences workshop. You can navigate as well to the exit survey and just have it open in your browser tab during the session. So in this workshop, we'll present strategies for writing more concisely. Writing concisely is an essential skill both for academic writing, papers you might be working on in coursework. It's essential to getting papers published or completing milestones like dissertations. Writing concisely is also really important for industry careers, writing in the workplace, and writing to a wide variety of stakeholders. In this session, you'll learn how to diagnose wordy sentences. What are some signs and symptoms of wordy writing? We'll specifically use famous rhetorician Richard Lanham's Paramedic Method for diagnosing and fixing wordy sentences. Throughout the workshop too, we'll also reflect on which of these strategies are most effective for writing in your discipline. As we all know, in graduate school, different disciplines, subjects, and professions also have different preferred ways of writing and communicating. So while all the strategies presented here are ways to make writing more concise, some might be more useful or effective than others in the field of ISE, OR, or depending on the goals of your specific writing project. So first we'll start off with some warm-ups of thinking about what makes writing wordy. We'll then go through the steps of Richard Lanham's Paramedic Method and do some whole group practice. In the second part of the workshop, you'll have an opportunity to get some feedback on a short section of your own writing, which is why in the Informs ads, we asked you to have access to a sample of your own writing. This could be something you're currently working on or past writing. So let's get started with concise sentences. So I'd like for you to do, since this is a writing workshop, I'd like for you to do a little bit of writing in the Zoom chat. Thinking about wordy writing, chances are you came to this workshop because you're interested in making your writing more concise, or maybe someone said that your writing is wordy. So how would you describe wordy writing in your field? What are some features of wordy writing? And also, wordy writing is relative to our positions as readers or audience members. So thinking about how as a reader, how do you react to wordy writing? How does it make you feel? To maximize everyone's participation, I'm going to set a timer for 1 minute. You can gather your thoughts and type your answers in the Zoom chat, but don't hit send or post till you hear the timer. We do this in a lot of our workshops as a way to get a lot of people's perspectives at once and to give everyone some time to think. So you can type your answers in the chat, but don't hit send until you hear the timer. How would you describe wordy writing, or how do you react as a reader to wordy writing? Time's up. Feel free to hit post or send. How would you describe wordy writing? How does wordy writing make you feel? Great point, Mina, that there's a lot of clauses. As a reader, it's hard to understand. Kimia, great point too, that maybe visually on the page, it looks like it's many long lines. There's a lot of that or which, building off of Mina's point about clauses or parts of a sentence. It's definitely confusing. Okay, admit that these are long sentences. It sounds verbose, hard to read. Non-specific, yes, wordy writing can actually be quite vague despite containing a lot of words. Yeah, Mira, good point too. It's hard to understand. Tian Chung, that wordy writing can be redundant, repeating sentences or ideas. It's not straight to the point. Sometimes it is difficult to make a trade-off. Great point too about the challenges faced by engineering writers in terms of balancing specificity, detail, and precision with being specific and to the point. Yeah, that's a great insight that there's a trade-off. And in this session too, we'll present some tips and tricks for editing writing, recognizing wordy sentences, and thinking and practically thinking through some of the trade-offs. So Richard Lanham, the late famous rhetorician, proposed his Paramedic Method as a solution to fix wordy writing. And Lanham uses a medical metaphor comparing long sentences, wordy sentences with a lot of clauses to 6 sentences. And his Paramedic Method presents a way to diagnose the symptoms of wordy writing, triage these sentences, and ultimately treat or fix them. In the next 2 slides, I'll explain the 7 steps of Lanham's Paramedic Method. You can follow along too with the Paramedic Method patient sentence handout in the folder. To follow along in the workshop, you can either download and copy the handout or simply copy and paste the sentences in your own document if you'd really like to work on the sentences and fix them as we move along. So throughout the discussion lecture point, I'll be talking about one sample sentence that I like to call the patient sentence. If you'd like to, you can follow along and make changes to the patient sentence as we discuss it. You'll also have an opportunity to work on several more patient sentences at the end of the lecture portion. So Lanham's Paramedic Method has 7 steps, and we'll spend time delving into each one. But for Lanham, wordy writing suffers from 3 big problems, or each of these steps can be grouped into 3 big buckets. Wordy writing uses too many to be verbs, is, are, was, and were. For Lanham too, long intro phrases are a symptom of wordy writing. These long introductory clauses can mask the main point or delay the main point, making it difficult for readers to understand. Lastly, for Lanham, the 3rd big symptom of wordy writing is too many nominalizations. That word in itself is a mouthful, and it's a fancy term from linguistics that means noun forms of verbs. For example, we can think of how the noun organization comes from the active verb organize. And for Lanham, wordy writing often has too many of these, and we can look for ways to replace them with more simple active verbs. So again, the Paramedic Method has 7 steps, and we'll spend some time delving into each one of these steps. The steps are useful on their own as a way to triage wordy writing, but they can also be used cumulatively. And we'll see too the payoffs of applying this method cumulatively to your writing. So this is our sample patient sentence. So as you pointed out too about the symptoms of wordy writing, this sentence itself is really long. As you read it, as you take time to read it, you probably are confused by the meaning. When I first saw this too, I was a little confused. If you were to read it out loud too, your voice would probably get sing-songy, like in response to the issue of inequality for educational and occupational mobility. As readers, it's difficult to see the main point or the writer's emphasis. So how to fix it with the Paramedic Method? Step 1 is to circle the prepositions. Prepositions are the logical connecting words, in, at, of, for, as well as the ones seen here. Of course, prepositions are necessary in writing to connect ideas, to have logical expressions, but Lanham suggests that too many of these can make writing convoluted, difficult to understand. If you're using a lot of prepositions in your writing, there might be a better way to organize or group ideas to make them more concise and user-friendly. So on the screen here, you see another copy of our patient sentence. What I'd like for you to do is take about 30 seconds to count the prepositions yourself and post that number in the chat. Again, as with our opening exercise, you can type the number in the chat, but don't hit post or send until time's up. So Lanham calls this circle the prepositions or count the prepositions. Okay, so how many prepositions? You can post your answer. Awesome. Yeah, great. Great job if you counted 6 prepositions. I too counted 6 prepositions. 2 ofs, 2 ins, 2 and 4. 6 prepositions. That's a lot. And again, here too, the rule is that if you're to be mindful of prepositions, if you're using a lot of prepositions in a sentence, there might be better, more concise ways to explain the information and arrange it. So step 2 in the paramedic method is to circle and find the is verbs. These are forms of the verb to be, like is, are, was, and were. And Lanham suggests that the blah, blah, blah is that format is particularly wordy and particularly unuser friendly. These are sentences that begin with there is or there are, phrases like this is because, the fact is that, the problem is that. And again, these sentences are problematic because the phrases like this is or there is block the main subject and verb. They delay the main action or point of a sentence. Again, linguists call these null subjects or fake subjects since they don't really add any real information or meaning to the sentence. And here too, in our patient sentence, you'll see that there's 2 of these blah, blah, blah is structures. The it is, some researchers believe, and the there is a system. Here too, that too suggests that there's better and more concise ways of arranging this sentence. So for Lanham, this comes down to finding the action in scientific or technical writing. And Lanham often frames this as who's kicking whom, but keeping in mind that the action or story could involve non-human actors. This could be the story of a supply chain process, a molecule, or a bridge. So what I'd like for you to do is to compare these 2 columns. So in the one column with the blue sentences, the blue column sentences and the red sentences are similar information, but a similar information and content, but which one do you think has more action? You can either answer in the chat or unmute yourself to explain. Cool. So Kimia, you think the red one? Yeah. So anybody else, what do you think? Which sentences have more action or which are easier to read? Okay, yeah, now I'm getting a lot of upvotes for the red. Yeah, so why the red? Again, you can unmute if you're comfortable, explain in the chat. Why is the red easier to read? Why is it have more action? Aman, good point that they're concise. Yeah, they're definitely, it's shorter words in the red column. Mohammed, good point too, that it's more direct or straight to the point. Maybe you notice too that in the red sentences use a single verb, but the blue sentences uses what we call a verb phrase. Phrases like makes a recommendation, gives analysis. A great point, Mina, substituting several words with a single verb. A great point too about active voice. So technically these blue sentences are active voice verbs, makes, gives, but there's a more specific, precise, or concise, and perhaps more interesting verb hidden in the noun forms of recommendation and analysis. In the red column simply uses one active verb to express the same idea. Again, phrasal verbs aren't bad, and we often use them a lot when we talk. But when it comes to writing, the single active verb is more precise and more concise. Chances are too, you thought the red sentences were more interesting and easier to read as well. Which brings me to the third point of the Paramedic method, to box up nominalizations, or those problematic noun forms of verbs. A quick way to look for this is to look for nouns ending in tion, ion, ment, and ity. These are often signal noun forms of verbs or signal that there's a hidden verb locked up somewhere in your sentence. And again, for a little more context, we can think how communication comes from the verb communicate, the noun development comes from the verb develop. So returning here to our patient sentence, you might notice that it contains the noun form belief to describe how what researchers know about gender inequality in the school. And so belief, you can turn, for the next part of the Paramedic method, simply replace this nominalization or clunky phrasal verb with a simple active verb. In the case of our patient sentences, belief could become believes. Again, as Landon puts it, it's about finding the action or asking who's kicking whom. So you might think too that this has something to do with passive voice versus active voice. And y'all mentioned this too in your answers in the chat. Passive voice meaning where the grammatical subject of the sentence is not the doer. Passive voice usually having a form of the verb to be where the doer is announced with by. And so chances are, as academic and technical writers, you use a lot of passive voice in your writing. So thinking about that, just as a question, you can answer either in the chat or unmute yourself. Is it okay to ever use active voice in your field, or what do you think?
I think in papers, if it's kind of you're talking about something's done in the literature and you don't want to like refer specifically who has done it, or there are several people who's done it, you have to use passive voice there. I don't know, I feel like it feels more right to use passive there, but yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Camilla, for explaining. Yeah, so chances are in your field, like you use a lot of passive voice, especially in the methods, right, where you're putting more emphasis on what was done, the process or product, rather than the doer. In fact, in most fields, passive voice is nearly mandatory for method sections. On the other hand, though, research into scientific and technical writing has shown that more writers are using active voice in other settings to make the writing more concise and user-friendly. Here too, like, we're not saying to replace every instance of passive voice with active voice, but to be more mindful about how you're using passive voice, in what parts of a paper, or what audiences, who's the audience for your paper, to be more mindful about how you're using passive voice and why you're using it. So the advice here for finding the action is to eliminate the passive voice if appropriate for the section of your paper, for your audience, or for your purposes as a writer. And to keep in mind too that the doer or the action in a scientific writing sentence may be an inanimate object. So sometimes too, it's easier too to replace passive voice with active voice if you'd like to describe the objective of your paper or the goal of your paper. It may be easier, instead of saying that blah, blah, blah was examined, you can simply write this paper examines, this study examines. It's often a more straightforward, concise, and clearer way to express your goal in a paper. So keeping in mind that a doer might not be people, it could be something inanimate. So returning to our patient sentence, we can see that our patient sentence is getting better. In the case of that sentence where it talked about, it is researchers' belief, or it is believed by researchers, in this case, we can agree that the view and the belief is being held by the researchers themselves. So we could simply revise this sentence to say some researchers believe that gender inequality exists in the school system. The next part of the paramedic method involves those long introductory clauses, or as Lanham puts it, start fast, no slow windups. The point here is to place the main subject and action verb as close to the beginning of the sentence as possible. That long intro phrases can delay the action or mask the action of a sentence. Linguistic research also suggests that readers of academic English expect the subject and verb to come in the first half of the sentence, and that sometimes readers even expect the first words of a sentence to be subject and verb. So the goal here is to eliminate long intro phrases when possible, either eliminating them altogether, rearranging the structure of the sentence, or shortening intro phrases to get to the point. So again, here's what this looks like in terms of our original patient sentence about the school system. So this intro clause is really long and distracting. It's 12 words before our main subject, some researchers, and about 15 words before the next nominal subject, there is. So one way to do this is to eliminate unnecessary words and phrases. And this can be done with the sixth step as you look for and limit the length of intro clauses. In this case, the core message of our original patient sentence concerns gender inequality and a system of gender inequality in the schools. You may have noticed too that this main point is delayed, and it's literally like the last 6 words or the second half of the sentence. So here's some ways that we revise that sentence. So the first one, some researchers believe that gender inequality exists in the school system. We got rid of the it is and the there is phrase. And in the second revision, gender inequality exists in the school system. Both of these sentences are more straightforward, concise, and clearer to understand. They also express a similar idea. However, they are a bit different. So again, you can answer in the chat or unmute. So where would you use each of these 2 revisions? Are there some contexts that would be better for one than the other? I mean, interesting point. So the second one is a really broad claim. Yeah, I noticed too, the second one, the first one is supported by a source. Yeah, the first one gives some information about the source, in this case, some researchers. The second one, as you point out, is a really broad claim, or it's not qualified. But perhaps in some fields, you could write this claim and then cite the name of the researchers at the end, but it still is definitely more impersonal, whereas the first one is giving a lot of credit to these researchers for their views and their discoveries. Again, I think the preference, neither of these sentence configurations is bad. I think it also may come down to a preference of different disciplinary communities and the way those communities to report like the literature and ownership of ideas. But we can all agree that these two revisions are a lot cleaner and a lot healthier than the patient sentence, right? They use simple active verbs. They express their key ideas in a more concise way. They don't use a lot of it is or there is, and they tend to avoid long intro phrases. So the payoffs of the paramedic method, putting it all together, you can see in the side-by-side comparison, our original patient sentence was around 27 words, and the shortest revised version of it was 7 words. And we call this measuring the payoff or the success of the paramedic method. Lanham calls this the lard factor. Again, comparing wordy sentences to so much fat or lard that chokes the arteries of sentences. So you can measure your revision success by dividing the number of words taken out of the original from the total number of words in the original to get this percentage of unnecessary words. So going back to our original patient sentence, there were 27 words in the original. Our final revision was 7 words, which means we removed 20 words. This suggests that 74%, or nearly 3/4 of the original words, were unnecessary for the meaning of the sentence. So the paramedic method is a really helpful set of tips to recognize the symptoms of wordy writing or diagnose the writing. It also gives a handy set of tools to fix wordy writing, from replacing weak is verbs with stronger, simple active verbs, to looking for noun forms of verbs, to counting prepositions and rearranging information to make it more straightforward. So we can now stop the recording and move into the more interactive portion of the workshop. This includes, so we have about